Hello whisky fans, Bunnahabhain Feis Ile part 3 today. This is the big boy. We've saved the expensive one till last. This is Bunnahabhain 1998 Calvados Cask finish. So this is the one that PS Whisky was complaining about, if we're honest, and quite rightly so, because it's £400 a bottle. £400 for a 23-year-old whisky. You can get 23-year-old whisky for much cheaper than that, even if it is high strength. So what do we know about this whisky? It's 23 years old. It's finished in a Calvados cask. Now, Calvados is apple brandy, literally brandy but made with apples rather than grape. And Calvados casks are something that was very recently allowed, made legal by the SWA, at the same time as they made tequila and mezcal casks legal. Now the Tokay white wine cask finish, I'd never had that before, but with this one, Calvados, I have had Calvados cask whiskies before. I had a Calvados cask matured Arran whisky at the Isle of Arran distillery in 2015. Absolutely loved it, phenomenal whisky. I think they were selling it for quite a reasonable price back then, just over £100, a little bit younger than this, a bit higher strength, but much cheaper and really good whisky. This whisky here, we know that this isn't matured full term in that Calvados cask. It's actually finished for a period of 2 years. So that's quite a long finishing period. Almost, I would say it's not, but it's getting towards the point where it's more of a double maturation than a cask finish, which is good. ABV of this one is coming in at 49.7% ABV. We know that it's natural colour, we know that it's non-chill filtered. We know that it's £400. Interestingly with this one, it sold out really quickly. Unless I take forever to get these videos out, I think the Bunnahabhain and the Tokay wine cask finish were still available, at least when I was recording this video, whereas the £400 Calvados cask finish Bunnahabhain sold out almost immediately, and that's despite the high price. Now, with the Tokay wine cask, they tell us that it's nearly 1,700 bottles in the run. With this one, they don't tell us how many bottles there are, but I suspect that it's probably more like a few hundred rather than a few thousand. Possibly just one Calvados cask, but we don't know. So I've had this whisky in the glass breathing for a little while, because it is a 23-year-old whisky and you need to treat that with respect. Interestingly, the colour of this one, and I don't know if it's from the finish or the fact that it's just a very old whisky, I'd say that that's noticeably a couple of shades darker than the Bunnahabhain and darker than the Tokay wine cask finish as well. Now, I try not to get too hung up about colour with whisky, because it doesn't really matter. As long as it's natural colour, whatever colour it is, doesn't make any difference to whether it's a good whisky or not. But interesting to see that it is that bit darker. So Bunnahabhain 1998 Calvados Cask Finish Whisky for Feis Ile 2022. Let's see how it noses. So I think that the flavours on the nose of this, the aromas, they stand out quite a lot less than the very explosive, intense, sweet, boisterous, almost clashing flavours that we had on the Tokay wine cask. This is a bit more subdued, a bit more gentle, getting lots of sweet, creamy aromas on the nose, definitely a lot of vanilla. You can definitely tell the influence of that Calvados cask, because I'm getting lots of green apple notes, in particular apple pie with cinnamon on top, and a little bit of pear, and possibly a little bit of smoke. I can't tell if there's a little bit of residual smoke, perhaps from a refill cask, or possibly just residual smoke from the stills and all the equipment there at Bunnahabhain. But it does seem to me that there's a tiny hint, tiny trace of smoke on this one, even though it's not a Monia release. This is an unpeated Bunnahabhain. Also getting those trademark old oily malt notes on the nose of this one, but must be said reasonably simple. A little bit of pleasantly bitter apple peel on the nose of this as well, but really is surprisingly and slightly underwhelmingly simple. Let's see how it tastes. So very pleasant on the palate. Sweet and fruity apple, in particular toffee apple, strong hint of, strong flavour of very sweet toffeed green apples. Quite sugary, although probably not as sugary as the Tokay wine cask. Very pleasant, but also very one-dimensional. I spent quite a lot of time tasting this whisky before I did the tasting notes, and to be honest, I struggled to find many descriptors, especially for the palate on this one. It's a very pleasant whisky. You can tell it's well made, but it's really very one-dimensional. As for the finish, medium length with quite an abrupt ending. Again, lots of apple, well-matured malt, but reasonably brief. It's all over that little bit too soon. So honestly, with this one, bearing in mind this is a £400 whisky, it's a 1998 vintage, so it's some very old stuff. I don't want to be too negative about these Feis releases, because it's great that we have them and we can try them, especially as samples, but I honestly have no idea what happened with this whisky, and to be honest, I'd be extremely pissed off if I'd paid £400 for this. It's good stuff, it has to be said, but it's not a showstopper. It seems to me a little bit like a particularly neutral cognac finished whisky. It has a lot of similar notes to what you get from a cognac cask. Now, it's obviously a fairly old whisky, but to my palate at least, it seems like it's quite empty and that little bit too simple. And I do think that, in hindsight, if it was me tailoring these whiskies, I would have probably been tempted to have put ammonia peated Bunnahabhain into that Calvados cask instead of what actually went into it, because that would have probably made it quite a lot more interesting. As for a grade, and this is a good mark, but not a good mark for a £400 whisky, going to give it a C. At the price that it sells for, I really wouldn't recommend this. And I'd actually say I've tasted this before the video, tasted it head to head with the Avon-Araig, and I almost prefer the Avon-Araig no age statement to this, because it is that much bolder, despite tasting obviously quite a lot younger. But the flavours that the Avon-Araig has got, they're just so much more intense than what you get from this. And without a doubt, I definitely prefer the Tokay wine cask to this, which is half the price. Still overpriced, but half the price that you have to pay for this one. So I am very interested to see what other people think of this Calvados finished Bunnahabhain that they've released for Feis, because it's not just my opinion that matters. Everyone has different experience with these things. It's entirely possible that it's just me that didn't connect with this whisky, but to me it's a little bit of a non-event. Now, is it because of that Calvados cask finish? I don't think that we can blame it on that, because that Calvados finish whisky that I tried at the Isle of Arran in 2015 was much more intense and quite a bit more complex than this. It does seem like Calvados is possibly one of those super sweet cask types, like Pedro Jimenez, and especially like port, which I think cover up a lot of the base spirit, so that probably hasn't helped. But I don't think that's the full story with what's gone on with this whisky. Talking purely about the price point of this whisky though, £400, which as I've said several times is far too much for any whisky, in my opinion, if you're buying it to drink rather than as a stupid investment. It takes me back to a few months ago when I was actually talking to the people that own Bladnoch, and I asked them how old their Bladnoch Vinea release is, and they refused to say. And some of my subscribers actually asked them why they wouldn't say what the age statement was, and they said that if you put a low relatively age statement on a whisky, then people complain when you charge a price that reflects the level of quality in the whisky. Whether it's worth that price or not, people just have this gut reaction that they don't want to pay a lot of money for something that's not old, whether it's good or not, which is fair enough. That's their policy and good luck to them. But I'd also say that a lack of age statement in itself also puts people off buying a product, because that silence on the matter is also a form of dishonesty in that you're withholding that information. I'd actually suggest that the reverse of what Bladnoch is true, and this isn't just aimed at Bladnoch or Bunnahabhain, but when you highball the price on whiskey, it pisses off the customer when the quality doesn't meet the expectation that that price gives. And I do think that we all know that the prices of whiskey are shooting up and up, production costs have gone up, demand is skyrocketing, everything's becoming more expensive, and it's becoming normalised that we're paying like used car prices for bottles of whiskey, or some of us are. But I think that beyond a certain price point with whiskey, these distilleries aren't doing themselves any favours. They're really giving themselves an impossible task of meeting those expectations set by the price when the price goes that high. And I think that's absolutely fine. That's a fair approach for the consumer to have. Because if you are paying top price for a whiskey, then it's only fair that you expect top quality. My advice to you guys out there is vote with your wallets. When you see distilleries that are gouging people on price, and as much as I absolutely love Bunnahabhain and I love the core range, I think that the 12 and the 18 and the Toychuk and Toychagar and even the Sturadar, they're all pretty much appropriately priced. They're all really good value, exceptionally well made, craft presented whiskies. But I think that with these Feis Ile whiskies, I do think that Bunnahabhain are fleecing us. They are gouging us on price, and that's a little bit unfair. So exactly what I've done here, I've bought samples of these because I just wasn't happy paying the price of a full bottle for any of these. And I'd recommend that you guys are shrewd with your purchases and you do the same thing. If the price is too high, find somewhere else to buy your whiskey. I've done a little bit of research when I was looking at the prices of these whiskies, and from a brief Google, some of the major online retailers, I can get a 25-year-old, so older than this, 25-year-old cask strength Ben Rinnes. So Ben Rinnes is another less prestigious distillery, but another distillery that puts out really great heavily sherried whiskey. It's a signatory bottling for well under half the price of this £400 Calvados Bunnahabhain. So you really have to ask, what is Bunnahabhain offering in this Feis Ile release that you don't get from that cask strength Ben Rinnes? Personally, I'm not too sure. So over to you guys, what do you think? What is the upper price limit for whiskey for you? Or is that limit a bit more dynamic and moving up to allow you to continue to enjoy those same whiskies that you've enjoyed as the prices go up? And do you think that there is a concrete fixed upper limit to the price where no whiskey can ever be worth that much money? Let me know what you thought about this one if you've been fortunate enough to try it. What do you think about Calvados casks? What do you think about Calvados? Thanks for watching and cheers.